All right, everybody. I'm going to try to go a little bit faster this time so I don't go over my 15-minute time. This week we're talking about concepts, operationalization, and measurement. And this should be pretty quick since I've already covered a little bit of these concepts in the previous lecture. So measurement is important, but it's also kind of difficult to do correctly. So you guys can see that conceptualizing things is a very important part of the process. The conception is actually kind of the mental image we have about something, and then the concepts are the words, phrases, symbols, and language that we use to represent them. So, for example, gender, punishment, chivalry, delinquency, racism, sexism, assault, deviance, income, these are all examples of concepts, right? But people might measure them differently. Gender has traditionally been measured as being either male or female, but, in recent years, we're starting to realize that that's not the proper way to measure this, because some people do not identify as being binary. So that's an interesting thing with that. There's three classes that scientists measure. There's the direct observables, the indirect observables, and the constructs. So the direct things are colors, shapes, qualities, stuff you can get at pretty quickly and easily. Indirect is require relatively more subtle, complex, or indirect things, reports, court transcripts, stuff like that. You don't actually see the people committing the crimes and stuff like that, but you see reports of it and transcripts, stuff like that. Constructs are a little bit more complicated. They're more your theoretical creations. So one example that we typically use in research methods is this, the idea of socioeconomic status, right? That's not something you can really see or observe, and there's different ways of kind of even measuring that and operationalizing that I'll probably talk about to some extent as we go through this lecture. So conceptualization, I've already touched on in the last class, is pretty important. It's how you conceptualize things, and that's the beginning part, and then you want to make sure that you operationalize them. And so crime seriousness, that could be kind of divided into multiple dimensions, right? Who defines something as being serious? What the offender defines as being serious is going to be way different than what the victim does, right? And so you might look at some indicators of this, maybe physical injury, economic losses, psychological consequences, things like that, right? That lead to a deeper understanding of these things. What is poverty? What's delinquency? What is strain? These are all more abstract things, and these are, it's easy to measure, some things, but other things kind of make better examples when we talk about conceptualization and measuring things, right? I've already talked about what is SES, right? Well, working definition, maybe you might think about how much money people make, maybe their level of education, stuff like that. But either one of these things are not in and of itself SES, right? Socioeconomic status. And so you might conceptualize that and operationalize it a little bit differently, and maybe make some sort of index that combines all of these things together. So when you look at conceptualization, your conceptual definition, then your operational definition, and then kind of how you're going to measure these things in the real world. This is kind of the progression of how you do this stuff. And a lot of this stuff is really easy to, if you want to measure race, you just ask people what their race is, and then you have a variable for race. If you're white, black, Hispanic, different, Hispanic is ethnicity, but anyway, you get my point. And so that's easier. And then other things are more difficult, like I said. And so it moves us closer to our measurement and what might work. And then measurement is actually assigning numbers or labels to units of analysis. When we do analysis, we typically make, if it's two categories, we make one of them 0 and one of them 1. And one might be male and one might be female. And when we do the analysis doesn't know the meaning of male and female. All it knows is the difference between 0 and 1, right? And this will make more sense as you do more of the labs and start to assign numbers to these things and actually impute the data, which probably should have helped you a little bit when you did the lab assignment from Module 5, I believe. So maybe that will help you to understand this. So we want to try to make things exhaustive and mutually exclusive as well, right? So that way you can only have one attribute. We don't want you to have multiple of them because that messes things up. So your employment status, well, you're either employed or you're not. But we also want it to be exhaustive. Maybe we might put, are you employed full-time or part-time? Are you retired? Things like that. So that way you can have every possible type of observation going on there. Levels of measurement. When you look at things, there are different levels of measurement, and this is sometimes difficult for students to wrap their mind around. Nominal is what we usually consider to be categories. So you might have race, gender, state of residence, things like that. These are all what I would call categorical variables. And then you have ordinal variables, which are also categorical, but they have an ordered rank. So like education. You either have a high school degree, an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, master's degree, a PhD, things like that. So as the categories increase, they go up. And then you have your two continuous variables, which are interval and ratio. And intervals have meaningful distance between the attributes. So when you look at things like temperature and IQ, that can be important to think about there. There's a meaningful distance between them, right? Temperature is 1 degree, increases each time, right? But there's no true 0 point because temperature can be negative or positive. And then other things like age, number of prior arrests, sentence length, income, and things like that, they have a true 0 point. That makes them ratio variables. So implications of levels of measurement, well, this has ways that it matters how we measure them, right? The highest level of measurement possible is what we really want to do. You cannot convert a lower level of measurement to a higher one, but you can do it the other way around. So the key to understanding this stuff is to really think about the reliability and the validity of them to make sure that you're actually measuring the best you can with precision. You're hitting that, remember I was talking about the target and shooting the gun, you're hitting that bullseye every time that you shoot your gun of measurement, so to speak. So I already talked about reliability last class, so I'm not going to go into that detail. Some of the ways that you can actually assess reliability is the test-retest method, the iterator reliability, and the split-half method. So test-retest, you're essentially just doing it over and over again, and you should get the same response each time. Interrelator reliability is maybe you're getting multiple people to do it in order to get what you call convergent reliability. And in the split-half method, you would split samples in half and then conduct your analysis on the two halves to see if they get the same results too. Validity, I've already talked about validity last class, so we won't go into too much of that. But then methods of dealing with this. So you have construct, face validity, content validity, a lot of them. So face validity, well, does it seem valid on its face? Or does it just seem like it's a stupid measure of something, right? Criterion compares the measure to some other sort of external thing. Construct validity is whether it relates to another thing that you can be logically expected in that direction. Content validity is a measure, covers the range of meanings included in the concept, so that gets it whether it's exhaustive or not, and multiple measures is whether you're using alternative measures and kind of creating some sort of indices. Or composite measures, so to speak. So composite measures are really combining multiple things together. Like I talked about with SES, you might want to measure income and education and maybe even occupational prestige, right? To get at these things. And this is a little bit more advanced And so, it's something that we'd actually, if you were graduate students, we would teach you how to make these things. But we're not doing that in this class, and I'm sure you'll all be thrilled that you don't have to do it. So anyway, typologies are a little bit less common too. And so taxonomies and produced by the intersection of two or more variables to create a set of categories or types. This is very similar to the making an indices or a composite measure. You might look at non-delinquents, starters, desisters, stable people, de-escalators, escalators, different things like that to create these taxonomies, so to speak. And then maybe you might want to create an index of disorder, right? If you're measuring social disorder and social disorganization in an area. You could have multiple different measures for what makes up disorder, or broken windows, so to speak. Groups of loiterers, drug use, sales, vandalism, gang activity, public drinking, street harassment. No one of these things you would really say makes up disorder completely, right? But if you put them all together, then maybe they do, at least the social disorder. Then you can measure the physical disorder of the other things, and you have two different indexes of these. So these are just examples of how you might do this. This is kind of more complicated than some of the easier things. Excuse me. But these composite measures are more valid measures than just a single question, right? Because they're really getting at all of these different things rather than just, well, we're going to measure social disorder as whether there's any broken down cars in the area. Well, that's not the best way of doing it, right? Because there's all these other things that you could use to get at it. So I hope that gives you all a good idea of kind of the importance of measurement and operationalization. Maybe more than you wanted to know, but I'm sure most of you are going to get more than you want to know in this class anyway. So with that, I will sign off, and please don't forget to do your quiz and your discussion boards, and I will talk to you next time.